Well, just as a reference point, it's July 15th, 2010. Do you call it 2010?
I don't know. 2010 is what I go for.
Yeah, Calvin says 2010. I don't know why I got in the habit of 2010. I believed somebody when they said you should pronounce it that way. Doesn't matter. Time goes by at the same speed, whatever we called it.
Exactly.
I was talking with somebody the other day and they mentioned Y2K. You were only 12 when that happened, Christina.
Not quite, but...
Christina Parker Wingler, how are you today?
Excellent.
I'm excellent too. It's a warmish day and a warmish summer, which is nice if you like tourism and
Yes.
beaches and outdoors. And Christina is the manager of this wonderful space, which used to be a stable and who knows what else over the years, which is now the home of the Best of the Battle of Plattsburgh Association, War of 1812 Museum, gift shop, interpretive center,
Key Bank Art Gallery,
Key Bank Art Gallery,
and the Press Republican Theater.
I can't stand it. That's way too much, all for one day. And you've been associated with this organization for how long?
I've been the employee here for just over 5 years.
Is that possible?
I don't think so, but I have to calculate every once in a while.
You're a pretty short
Seems
lady, but
amazing.
you were much shorter when I first met you as part of the famous Parker family
That was a little bit ago.
in West Jay-Z,
Yeah.
the best family in the world. Before we started the camera, we were just talking about the maple syrup season. But the Battle of Plattsburgh Association is part of what we call a museum campus here in the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base on the old base. And it has grown tremendously.
Yes.
You've got some fun people working with your group, including the Presidente,
Yes.
Keith Herculow, our dear friend.
He's wonderful.
But it's including when things don't stick on the wall for the new exhibits, right?
Yes. He's our handyman, our president, our champion.
He's amazing. He
works.
wields a pretty good hammer, so people better
Yes.
not cross him. Not to mention the fact that he's a good writer, and I saw him quoted recently as a leading historian.
Excellent.
Cool, huh? We
Good for
referred
us.
to him for a few years as an amateur historian.
He's moved up.
But you know, one of the first programs Calvin and I ever did for my contributions to Our Little Corner was a tour of City Hall with the city clerk, Keith Herculow. And it was cool. We learned a great deal that time. And we've learned a lot about history since then because of our association with you. You've always been interested in area history.
I have. Actually, Addie Shields took me to my first historians conference when I was 12.
Once you meet Addie
So,
Shields,
Yep.
she
And
left the mark on you.
she did. And then we found out we had the same birthday.
I did not know that
yes,
until right now.
June 24th. So I grew up as little Addie.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
I'm sorry I didn't wish you a happy birthday just a short time after my own birthday this year. I think of you as a teenager, no matter how old you ever will get to be, Christina. So Addie Shields started that.
Yes.
And you were always interested, and that was when you were how old?
I was 12 when she took me to my first historians conference, and the people there pretty much cried and looked at me and said, "You're the next generation. It's on you." So that was my intro, and then
Yeah.
she got me involved here with the Battle of Plattsburgh.
She put the yoke on your shoulders,
Very much so.
to quote a historical phrase. But then you entered the contest. How old were you when you entered that McMaster's contest?
I was in college.
By
So
then?
yes.
And won.
Yes, with a paper on Altona Flat Rock.
And we were so proud of you. Larry
Thank you.
Cooley was proud of you.
Oh, he was a great help for that.
Larry is a good guy, and he loves local history too. Thank goodness
Yes.
for key people like Larry Gooley and Calvin Castine and Keith Herculow and others who really prime the pump when it comes to preserving history.
We all have to work together.
Did you ever think, when you first walked into that interpretive center across the street, that someday after a few years you'd be over here in this giant space?
This is better than I could have imagined. We always plan on having several buildings, and it was very weather dependent. This is great. You can go around in a circle and see the whole thing. You don't even have to leave.
And I should mention that it wasn't pure chance that you got here. A lot of people worked very hard. You've got a lot of wonderful people in your organization.
Yes.
That's great. It starts with Keith, and he wants to get the job done.
He does, and do it right. So, and we have all our volunteers that back us up very much. Our entire board works very hard.
Isn't it great?
It is.
They're all very caring, local people who've been involved in history for a long time.
Yes.
Now, we're here for a very special reason today. What is that, Christina?
We opened in the end of May, we opened our new exhibit, Mrs., Mistresses, and Misconceptions, and don't make me say that 3 times fast.
Who dreamed up that title?
Joy DeMars, Keith's
Did
wife.
she
Yes.
really?
Yes.
It would take an English teacher to come up with that, you know.
English PhD at that, so.
Oh, a lot of
So-
alliteration there. Well, she's a sweetheart. And
Yes.
we love Joy. She's volunteered as much as anybody has for this organization.
Definitely.
So was it a big job to get it set up?
It took us about 1.5 years from concept to finish, and now we're just trying to keep everything together.
And we're going to take a look at it
Excellent.
today.
Yes.
Christina Parker Wingler, the Battle of Plattsburgh, War of 1812 Museum. We're going to take a look at it on Our Little Corner. Stay with us. It shouldn't come as a great surprise to a lot of people watching this program outside the immediate Plattsburgh area in northern New York that they, their families, and many people who don't live here, who haven't visited here, have no idea the roles we played during that critical time in our nation's history in the War of 1812, right?
The Battle of Plattsburgh was the most significant battle of the War of 1812.
We keep saying that, and nobody is listening outside our area. I hope we'll live long enough to get the message out.
We just got to keep beating that drum, I guess.
You know, I kid other people because we've been to New Orleans, and in the tours in New Orleans, you know, thanks to Johnny Horton and the Battle of New Orleans, they do talk about the Battle of Plattsburgh or the Battle of Lake Champlain, and well, they should.
Excellent. It was all part of the same campaign.
So this is where we start. If you were to come on the tour here, talking about the Northern Theater of the War of 1812, who did all these posters for you?
These were all done by Dan Ferguson Designs out of Morrisonville.
Yes, of course.
Dan does all our exhibit design work, lays everything out, and I come up with the text and the graphics, and then they're all produced actually in Montreal, and then come back to us.
Isn't that great to have professionals working for you? You were
Yes.
telling me before about an artist friend who lives way downstate who helps you, and
Yes, and we'll see some of his artwork today.
I love it. So that's where people start, find out what this area is all about, illustrating a portion of the Northern Theater during that time period. And it was a volatile time in our nation's history. There was a lot going on. We've done a number of programs, and every year, around September 11th, we really get busy, don't we?
Very much so. It's a huge reenactment. The whole town gets involved in commemoration.
I looked at your list of events and programs that's coming up. It's like 3 pages long.
We try and keep it active and in people's minds.
It really is, and we hope we can entice people who haven't vacationed here in September to come and join us this year.
Excellent.
Kids love it. We had a family just walking in as we came up here today. People from out of town hear about it.
Right.
I've done the same with my growing family. When we go to a town that has some history, the first thing we do is tramp through the cemetery. They didn't always like
Perfect.
that as little kids.
I love that.
But don't you love to go to cemeteries?
I do.
I love. All right, now I'm going to step aside. What's this?
This is our introductory panel. Since the exhibit is about women, we chose to have the introduction be a fabric panel that kind of comes out of the wall and pops out at the visitor. So there we have our title, Mrs., Mistresses, and Misconceptions.
Isn't that great? It's finally, we give the distaff side the credit it's always deserved.
Yes, very much.
In our society, we've watched this struggle since the beginning of time. Well, you're not old enough to go back to the beginning of time, but I can almost go that far. And I'm pleased to see how far the women's side has come. And women have always played a significant role in history, but since many historians have been men, they've been largely overlooked.
Very much so.
Time to change that.
Yes, that's what we're trying to do here. And when Ruth Mallory came to me with the concept of what women were doing in Plattsburgh and the War of 1812, I sort of drew a blank look and said, I hope you know something about that. So we had to do a little homework before we put the exhibit together.
Your organization and many others have been involved in some great reenacting in this area. And at first it was mostly men that were in reenacting. Now it's whole families.
Yes.
And when you do your timeline and your other reenactments, isn't it great to see the family members involved?
Very much so. I think, several units have children that go with them now, with the whole families. And it's, so much better than sitting inside and, playing a video game. Or you can really bring history to life and make it fun.
That's wonderful. I'm so glad you brought the Interpretive Center over here. We're going to take a look at that before we leave, but
Excellent.
We just want to walk around the room, if you will.
Yes.
You would, if you bring your family in here, you would want to go counterclockwise, reading first the Northern Tier Theater, then the title of the exhibit, plus a little background information, and then you turn the corner.
Yes.
So we're going to do that.
Okay.
It was good fortune from Providence herself, notice I said herself, that you were able to secure this building for all the exhibits and things that you have here. And I know every day when you come to work, it pleases you to see what's happened here, doesn't it, Christina?
The growth is amazing, and the more that we can utilize these buildings that were left over from the Air Force Base, the better off we're going to be. They're here anyway.
We have the Clinton County Historical Association in a large building with lots of chimneys.
Yes.
And we have the transportation building here. We have what we hope will be a wonderful future for the old stone barracks on the base. This is just such a picturesque place, steeped in history. Every square foot has something you could talk about on this entire old base.
Definitely.
Because it's been a military installation off and on since
the War of 1812, actually.
Yeah, and actually during Revolutionary times there was activity around here as well.
Battle of Valcour and everything.
There you go. So we've turned the corner, so
Yes.
to speak, and literally, and we start with women's fashion and etiquette of the Regency period. Who helped you to figure out what goes where?
It was a combined effort with Joy DeMars, who I mentioned earlier, Ruth Mowry, and Sharon Bell. And what we did as a exhibit committee was Sharon did the fashion and etiquette sections and domestic responsibility, and then each individual who knew something about different areas covered each part. So it wasn't a sole effort, thank goodness.
Yeah. So people would have to come in here and read.
Yes.
You get a little background.
Definitely. What we tried to do here was do the background before we start telling the story of what women were doing during the War of 1812. We have to know what women were doing in general, their roles in the home, domestic life. And then the reason we put in the fashion and etiquette part was actually I was walking around here with the exhibit designer, and he said, well, you're going to do period dress and makeup, right? And I went, I wasn't really planning on it, but that sounds like a great idea. So we did some research, and there's actually an 1811 fashion book called Mirror of Graces that had some great quotes that we included.
That time period? Exactly.
Perfect.
Thanks to libraries and the internet, we can access information that we only dreamed about when I was even your age.
Excellent.
It's amazing. All right, domestic responsibilities. You don't still have any of those, do you, Christina?
A few, but they're partial though.
You've got a little needlework over here. A little needlepoint on the right-hand side. Is that real?
Yes, we were fortunate to be able to borrow artifacts from the Kent Lord House, the Clinton County Historical Association. There's some from the Peru Town Historian's Office, Alice T. Minor Museum, and several others.
Isn't that nice? Because history is in itself a collaboration of many times, places, and people. And isn't it good when the organizations can get together and say, yeah, we'll lend you that. But when it's our turn, we'll need your cannonball or whatever.
We actually have one piece that has to go back to the Kent Lord House for one day this summer and then come back here.
Really?
So we all have to work together.
I'm sure it can't get across town all by itself, so it'll be preciously carried. So what do we have here?
A mix of domestic items. We have a candle mold, carding combs for carding wool. We have a bread bowl. We also have a housewife, which It's actually what we call today a sewing kit, but they called it then a housewife.
Isn't that interesting? Seems to me I remember a pair of scissors with great big, like that, big enough almost for my fat fingers as a child. And certainly the candle maker.
Yes.
They were very common, and for some reason we always had one of those in our house, but my mother would never let me melt wax. Knowing me as well as you do, I think you can understand why.
I have a feeling I know why.
Yeah. So I saw candles made except in exhibits like this in many different places.
Right.
What's next? Oh, you have photographs.
We do.
Of reenacting.
Yes, we included photographs of women reenactors.
Isn't that great? Because that brings the past right up to the present, doesn't it?
It does. It kind of connects the reenactment that we see in September with everything else we do.
Through reenacting, through this museum, through all the celebrations that we have, and now we have quite a few over the course of the year here in the North Country. We turn the pages of history back and forth at will, don't we?
Yes, and it's fun.
Isn't it great? What's your favorite time period in history? Do you have one?
I'm most familiar with the War of 1812.
I wonder why.
Because I work here, and because what I don't get here, I get at home with my husband, who's a reenactor. My passion, however, is Civil War.
Is it really?
Yes.
And with many people. Because if you don't know why, then you don't know much about our nation's history.
Yeah.
And it's the same way with me.
Right, that's a popular one, but I had many ancestors that fought in the Civil War, and so I've traced their roots and things.
She married Josh Wingler, who is very much a reenactor and volunteer, has been a big part of our Haunted Haunts bus tours over the years. His parents are great stalwarts in terms of history. As a matter of fact, his dad is vice president of the
Battle Plattsburgh Association, yes.
And Bonnie is, not only
Star
that, she got a
volunteer.
couple pretty good ghost stories to add to the mix.
Yes.
So you married into a good family.
Definitely.
And so did they, by the way.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move along to the next exhibit.
Okay.
Well, women in wartime in Plattsburgh. What have we here?
We thought we'd bring it home a little bit to people that are familiar with the Battle of Plattsburgh. So we look at the time of the War of 1812 through the years of 1812, 13, and 14, what was going on here in Plattsburgh. So we have a notice that women should not quarter soldiers in their homes without the permission of the commanding officer. We have a reproduction copy from Pike's Cantonment saying that a laundress became ill while working at the cantonment and had to be dismissed. So that gives us proof that there was women there. And we also have original sketch work by John Purdy there in the middle of the laundresses working.
John Purdy is the artist we talked about from Geneva, did you say?
Elmira currently, and would like to come to Plattsburgh.
Well, come on. We'll get him up here one way or the other. That's absolutely wonderful. And we might mention while we stand here that President Keith Herculoe, who was still a city clerk for a while more, has become, I would say, without risk of too much contradiction, one of the world's leading historians on Pike's Cantonment. There have been so many people since I began the radio business who said, we found Pike's Cantonment. It should never have been lost, but it was. And lots of people said where it was, and it wasn't, until Keith did some very serious research and said, this is the place.
Yes. And then we were able to get the marker moved to the correct location. That was wonderful. And we're now working with an archaeologist, actually, to look at the 2-acre lot that's been undisturbed and see if we can discover more about it.
And knowing Keith, the word uncover has a lot of meanings for Keith Herculoe.
Yes.
If he can be the first guy there with a shovel, I know he will.
Definitely.
He'll find more of those big spikes that he found and many other things. And I have to personally thank Keith Herculoe because he is one of my dearest friends. And because of that, he's kept me in the loop, so to speak, through this whole process. And I'm very pleased that that information was found. And yes, this cantonment was not just 3 log houses. It was large.
It was quite large.
Yep. A lot of log buildings, hospital quarters, a lot of different things. Interesting parts of history, including a murder, were part of its history. And now you learn more. But tales of bravado, what's that all about?
We have the famous tale from the Hubble family.
Oh my goodness.
Of Mrs. Hubble telling the British officer as they marched past her home that they would come back in defeat. And they obviously thought they would be victorious here at Plattsburgh and said that if they lost, they would throw a purse of money at her feet as they left, and which they had to do.
Guess what? And that history lives on thanks to young George Hubble, who's told the story at a drop of a hat here on television and elsewhere for all those years.
Yes.
And then the safety of the home.
We have stories of individual families who actually stayed in Plattsburgh as the battle raged. In fact, we include the Culver family, who was at Culver Hill as the skirmish of Culver Hill occurred on September 6, 1814, and the account of the musket balls flying through their windows and around them as they took refuge in the basement. And then we have more stories about the Delord family and the struggles that they went through, being right at the eye of the battle, as you will.
You mentioned Culver Hill and Culver families. We talk about, Saleys and Smith Weed and all the other people who were instrumental, Platt, and so on. And there are remnants of their influence still around by the names of streets and buildings and even families around here that are descended from those same folks. So that's kind of neat, isn't it?
It is neat. You can have a direct line back to the past.
Yeah. And you've met a lot of those people. Are these gloves?
They are. They are what they call mitts. So they would have been fashion mitts of the period.
Where the thumb and the fingers are actually sticking out.
Right. It was very fashionable in the time to have gloves like that. These are not reproduction pieces. These are all original pieces. The shoes I know belong to the Hager family. So there's
another historic family from Cumberland Head that goes back several hundred years.
Yes.
That's great. So you managed to, but are these now on loan to this museum? Or?
These are on loan. The exhibit will be open. We opened it May 22nd, and the exhibit will be open for 18 months. So I need to start coming up with a new exhibit for this room.
Isn't that always the way?
It is.
This is a never-ending, I was going to say circus, but it'll be a circuit. Sometimes it's a circus when you're trying to figure out what to do.
Yes.
That's what museums do. They have circulating exhibits, don't they?
Very much, because we have returning visitors. We don't charge an admission fee, and we're open all year. So we have people that come in, and rather than come in once and say, "Oh, I've seen that place, we don't need to go back," we have a new look every time people come, and it's great. We operate on donations. So.
Some of us may not realize how this look of this area changes. I've told you before, and I've told Calvin and on camera, when I bring people here who haven't been to Plattsburgh for 20, 30, 40 years, I do the Cook's Tour. And that includes right past your place here, and I marvel at how things have changed in the last 5 or 10 years, including this wonderful museum right here where it is today.
Thank you.
That's great.
All right, we're
going to move along. We're spending a little time with Christina Parker Wingler in the War of 1812 Battle of Plattsburgh Association Museum on the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base. And we're in a tour of what turns out to be what women were doing.
Yes, that's what we're all about
during
today.
That time period. So what's the exodus, fleeing near and far, all about?
Well, as the battle raged, people had to choose whether to stay in their home and risk disaster or whether to flee and where to flee. In this case, the Exodus panel talks about fleeing to the Quaker Union in Peru. And we have Margaret Miller Davidson's account. She actually wrote a story explaining a particular chapter in the book explains what happened here at Plattsburgh, and she does it under the name of Mrs. Stanley.
Yes.
But it's very much true to what was going on here at Plattsburgh, and gives a wonderful, if somewhat flamboyant account of what was going on here during the battle.
Being a student of history, I'm sure you know, as I do, that some people did embellish their accounts, even the people that kept daily journals. And I read some personal accounts of the battles and skirmishes connected with the Battle of Plattsburgh. And flamboyant is an excellent word because, you know, they talk about how hot the lead was and how many British soldiers there were. And it was always exaggerated by sometimes factors of 10.
Yes.
So you have to filter all this stuff out. But fortunately, there were some people who were very serious in making accounts at that time period, including some of the officers on both sides. So we know pretty much what happened, don't we?
Right, exactly. We have wonderful first-hand accounts.
Even though people read history and they tend to perpetuate what they read, but we discovered a few years ago in inviting some people with far greater minds than I do, who came to town and did some studying and measured trajectories on the lake, and we actually discovered that the battle site was a little bit different than we expected.
Yes.
And of course, it didn't hurt to find the anchor of the Confiance at the bottom of Lake Champlain, which is now in City Hall.
Yes, maybe someday it'll come over here.
Do you think so?
I do.
You're going to have you and Keith won't be able to carry it by yourselves, you know.
We'll have to get some volunteers.
You know, thank goodness Calvin has been doing this with this camera on his shoulder all these years, and we did stand right there when that crane brought that into the front door.
Yeah.
And that wasn't a foregone conclusion, to me at least, until it got in there that it was going to fit.
It's a huge piece, and it gives you a real sense of what the ships looked like, the size, the scale.
It's absolutely a wonderful piece of history. I mentioned to our audience now, as we do this on the 15th day of July, something that you may not even know. Ground Zero in New York City, site of the terrible tragedy involving the Twin Towers. Guess what they dug up? An ancient ship.
Oh, wow.
Right in the middle of it all.
Wow.
Now you got something to look at on
It's
your
all
computer or on the news.
Yes.
And since they've exposed all the frame, all the ribbing to the elements, they've got to do some quick study on it before it deteriorates. And we'll find out what it was and how it got there.
Excellent. That'll
Isn't
be
that
fun.
cool?
Yeah.
All right, what's the next panel that Calvin's looking at now, the Quaker Union?
We focus specifically on the Quaker Union because so many people did go there. The Quakers were peaceful people, and they therefore didn't get involved in the war and provided a safe haven for a number of Plattsburgh area residents. And our display is put together thanks to Ron and Carol Allen and the Peru Town Historian's Office. They let us borrow a number of artifacts to bring everything together.
More dear friends, tremendously dedicated, energetic, smart people.
Yes.
We should mention also two things. First of all, that the people who don't know about the Quaker Union, now, I dare say maybe half the people watching this program never heard that phrase before. I would urge them to get out there with their kids and study it.
It's a little-known population, I think, and people are beginning to forget what happened.
But a very important part of the population, a very important place there in Peru. That did very special things even for the Underground Railroad many, many years later.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Stephen Keith Smith and individuals like that.
See? All right. Calvin turns left after that, and we have another great display right here with some real stuff.
Yes. We are going to leave behind Plattsburgh and begin to look at what we termed following the drum, and the idea of women being camp followers during the War of 1812. And this display here has a reproduction, British 3rd Regiment coat, actually also made by John Purdy.
What a talented guy, John.
Very, very much so. And that coat's actually my coat, but
it is?
put it on display for this exhibit. He also did the shako that goes with it. And the drum in the back here was donated by the Sanger family from Ingraham. Phil Sanger, and his cousin Jim Harris.
So do you think that was in the family since the Battle of Plattsburgh time?
I believe so. The story I got from Phil and his cousin were that they took it in. They thought it was Revolutionary War drum, and they used to bring it to school for show and tell.
Isn't
and
that
they didn't really know. And Addie actually acquired the piece. Addie Shields acquired the piece, and then left it to me and said, "I don't know. I think it's a reproduction." Well, there's a little air hole in the midsection of the drum. If you look into the air hole, there's a label, and we actually did a copy of the label that we have here on the floor.
Oh my goodness! No, you've got to be kidding! I didn't even know this part of it.
The label in the back of the drum says Pittsfield, Massachusetts, 1812, and details that it was Abner Stevens' drum. Beautiful piece, and we're so happy to have it.
On the Antiques Roadshow, they call that provenance.
Yes.
That immediately enhanced the historical and monetary value of that drum about 100-fold.
Yes.
Civil War drums are getting very expensive now, legitimate
Yes.
drums, so this one is great. And this talks about life in the Army and the wives and enlisted men's wives and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And the camp followers. That was true of almost every war, wasn't it? It was important to have them along for every reason.
It was. You needed extra cooks. You needed laundresses. You needed people to take care of the sick. The women also acted selling items, acting as what they called sutlers of the time period. So they were an important part of the Army. And sometimes, because of Army regulation, only dealing with men, it became actually a difficult thing for the Army to figure out how to deal with all these people, civilians following behind, trying to make their living through the Army.
That's why it's always a pleasure for me to see them at reenactors, the sutlers' tents and the whole 9 yards. Isn't it great?
Yeah. Yep, it's a historical, important part.
So, right down to the sailors' wives, and again, I must reiterate that a lot of what happened in the Battle of Plattsburgh or the Battle of Lake Champlain was not on the water. The vast number of things happened on the land.
The lake battle is what's remembered for the excellent work of Commodore Thomas McDonough and crew and his fleet, but there was 10,300 and some British troops here that arrived at Plattsburgh against 1,500 regular Americans and militia. It just happened to be that the lake battle decided the day.
Yeah, and for many years, Teddy Roosevelt and a few others were the only ones that seemed to know that this was a significant battle aside from the people whose ancestors lived here. Now we're finally realizing how, just what you said at the onset of our interview today, how absolutely crucial and critical that battle was.
It is, and we have to bring that out in people's minds.
We do. Locally at first, and anytime any audience will listen. I know Keith has traveled far and near. Have you yourself done any seminars or anything on the battle outside this area?
Not outside this area. My husband and I, Josh, travel locally. The furthest he's gone actually to do for paid presentation was Malone, which isn't very far, but still they weren't familiar with the Battle of Plattsburgh.
Outside this county anyway, sure.
Go for that. But Keith just got back from Restigouche, New Brunswick with the bateau.
Come on.
Yes.
Oh, with the bateau.
So we took the bateau.
With the rooster.
Yes, and we passed out brochures about the museum.
That's wonderful. And we do exchange historical information and reenactors and even exchange bands sometimes with other places. And Canada has been wonderful in coming over here with their marching units during our Battle of Plattsburgh parade and so on. So that's great. That bateau has been lots of places.
It has.
And we should mention that once in a while it has a little difficulty getting across the border.
Sometimes he runs into issues.
Because of the gun.
Yes.
But it's wonderful. And once again, thanks to Calvin hefting that heavy camera on her shoulder, we did tend to weather a storm the day that was launched. Were you there that day?
I was not.
I don't know if your husband was there. I can't remember.
He might have been. We
were there, hiding under whatever shelter we could find. I mean, it was coming down when that baby got in the water.
Huh.
It's a good boat, and it's good because it shows people what a bateau was all about.
Yes.
And bateaus have been used all the way back through history, too, you know?
Yes.
All right, let's move along, Christina.
Excellent.
We stopped for just a moment with the camera off to chat with one of our visitors from out of state. Always glad to have people in the community just stop by and discover this whole space for the first time. It's neat to preach the gospel, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, what's next, Christina?
As I said, we left the Plattsburgh section on the other wall, and now we're moving into what I call vignettes about famous women in the Northern Theater of the War of 1812. This section highlights women in unusual occupations. Anne Mott, a pioneer Canadian woman publisher. She ran her husband's business after his death during the War of 1812, and as sole proprietor had to change the name of the company so that people didn't realize that she was a sole proprietor. It was a bad time to have women as
Isn't that amazing?
business owners, so she had to work around that and be a little creative, but she kept the business going all through the War of 1812. And then we have the story of Sarah Smith Emery, who was a smuggler. And smuggling went on all through the War of 1812.
Oh, of course it did.
As there was embargo acts that prohibited the U.S. from trading with England, and in this case, trading with Canada. So it became an issue here in Plattsburgh and elsewhere along the northern border, trying to obtain goods.
Gee, I wonder if she were alive today, if she'd be bringing cigarettes down across the...
Same idea, different stuff.
Yeah, well, we lived through a very important part of our history called Prohibition here in the North Country, and Calvin has done several shows on that. What have we got on the table here?
Those are print blocks. They're actually reversed because that's the way they would have been laid out for printing. We chose just to do the numbers 1812. Those are period print blocks for this time period, and they were put on loan to us by Ann Tracy from Plattsburgh State University.
No kidding. Where the heck did they come from? Does anybody know the origin?
I don't know them in particular.
Wow.
Ruth Mowry was the one that worked on this section, and so she was able to get the print blocks for us.
Oh, because that, printing, the history of printing is wonderful. It's all part of communications. There's so much great history connected with the the old wood cuts and print blocks and so on.
Definitely, it's a story unto itself, I think.
Those are great. And then you have other pieces of apparel.
Yeah, we have other pieces, original and reproduction, kind of mixed in together, just showing items that were smuggled, items that could have been smuggled, based on her descriptions.
Now, what's behind you?
We have a period style dress. This is a reproduction on loan from Sharon Bell, and again you can see what they call the Empire waistline, the high waistline that was fashionable for the War of 1812 time period.
The museum, the Clinton County Historical Association, which is literally just across the street, has a great deal of clothing and cloth pieces in their collection too.
They do.
And like every other museum, everything can't go on display at the same time. Do you have an archive where you're collecting things?
We do, and we're always happy to have more items that relate to the War of 1812. If you're not sure, you can always bring them in. I look at them first usually, and then I pass them on to our collections manager. Again, Sharon Bell is our volunteer collections coordinator, and somebody can usually give you an answer, and if it doesn't fit our mission here at the museum, we can put you in touch with the museum it does associate with.
Christina Parker Wingler is her name, in case you just turned on your television set. If people want to get in contact with you, first of all, tell people exactly where you're located. They may never have visited the place here.
We're located on the old Plattsburgh Air Force Base, just off Route 9 if you go through the traffic circle, and you enter into the old base where all the brick buildings are, and then take the first right-hand turn on Washington Road, come all the way down to the end, and we're the building with the glass doors and the cannons out front. I love to say that.
I know we invite people to stop in. It's great to have the cannons out front. They look great. But how can people get in contact with you? Have you got a website?
We do. battleofplattsburgh.org is our website.
That's hard to remember.
So we're also on Facebook too, and I update that every day. And there's always, phone is 566-1814, so another easy one to remember.
The area code is 518.
Yes.
For people who want to make comments on this show, to perhaps suggest future exhibits, and maybe on the telephone you could say, that's a great idea. Would you like to be a volunteer?
Hey, we're always looking for volunteers. I'm the sole staff person. We're open about 30 hours a week, and that's our public hours. And we all work behind the scenes a lot more, so we need all the help we can get.
We love it. That's a little commercial for the organization, and we don't mind doing that all day long. All right, we're going to move along. I don't know how many likenesses have been done of Commodore McDonough. Do you?
I have no idea. There seems to be
That's
many
one of
floating
them.
about.
Is that one that belongs to the museum?
Yes.
Ooh,
Yes.
that's great. So what's this particular panel, if you will, Christina?
The title is Commander's Wives, as you can see, and what we tried to look at was the women behind the great man from the Battle of Plattsburgh. Commodore Thomas McDonough had a tremendous victory here on September 11th, 1814, and his counterpart was Alexander McComb, in charge of the Army forces, the American Army forces here. But what were their wives doing on September 11th, 1814?
We know that Lucy was about 8 months pregnant
Yes.
at the time, over in Vermont, right?
Yes. Yes.
Kind of out of harm's way.
She was, and Alexander McComb's wife, Catherine McComb, was actually here at Plattsburgh and wrote a poem about her experience as she watched her husband during the battle.
I did not know that.
Yes.
I knew I would learn something when I come here today. That's wonderful. Calvin says, who's this picture over here in the far wall?
That is Alexander McComb.
Okay, got him.
Unfortunately, we couldn't find images of their wives, so we had to include images
Isn't that
of them.
always the case?
But the image that we did include on the board was Catherine McComb's home, where she would have been when she probably met Alexander for the first time. They were actually cousins.
In New Jersey.
And yes, and they were married, but they would have met there on the front doorstep. That picture was made available to us by some descendants of the McComb family.
And I just learned by reading that about the first 6 children born here, including Alexander Saranac.
That is my favorite, and as soon as I heard
love
about that,
it.
I said it had to be included.
Oh,
So-
isn't that
And
terrific?
he was born in 1814, so that's a direct link to Plattsburgh.
These are very tasteful displays.
Thank you.
To know what to put in each panel, to have things follow, and to give people information. And speaking of giving people information, Calvin says, hey, you haven't told people what the Battle of Plattsburgh was all about. So let's just give them a brief synopsis right here and now, Christina.
The Battle of Plattsburgh occurred at almost the end of the War of 1812. The War of 1812 ended with the signing of the Treaty of Ghent, Christmas Eve, 1814. So the Battle of Plattsburgh, being September 11th, 1814, that we keep mentioning, was a decisive victory for the Americans. And there was 10,300 British troops marching down from Canada, and against about 1,500 regulars and a mix of militia. And it was a combined land-lake attack by the British. There was a large British fleet that also came down from the Illinois area in Canada and circled around, and it all occurred out here in Plattsburgh Bay. The Americans and the British fleet went at it for about 2 hours, starting at about 9 o'clock in the morning, and the British ship Confiance struck her colors at about 11 o'clock after the British commander, Captain Downey, was killed, and the USS Saratoga was actually able to turn her ship and present a fresh broadside against the British, deciding that victory. And with that, the land forces had been involved somewhat here, but that battle really never materialized to the extent that it could have, because the Lake Battle decided the day. And by September 12th, the British were basically marching back to Canada, leaving a lot of their dead and wounded here in Plattsburgh, where the dead still lie, Riverside Cemetery and in Crab Island.
So there's a lot to see here. We meant to tell Pete when he was here he should go over to Riverside where soldiers are buried side by side and hail a boat to Crab Island where you can see roughly the place where soldiers and sailors from both sides were buried. That is a very brief synopsis. We urge people to study more about it because there are a lot of nuances created by the folks who were involved in the battle and by just pure circumstance, things that happened around that time period. And this is a good time, I think, as long as we're doing a program with you, to mention President Keith Herculow's book, which is called
Battles of Plattsburgh, September 11th, 1814.
A simple title, but inside some revelations that I didn't know about until he discovered them, that he didn't know about until he discovered them.
Exactly.
But it fills in a lot of the historical blanks that were with us right up until he wrote that book, what, 2 years ago?
Yes. Well, 2007, so almost 3
Is it
years ago, I
almost
think.
3
Yeah.
years ago. But as fortune would have it, the book is available right here.
Yes, and the proceeds benefit the museum, so we're actually the only place you can get it, here in our history shop, as we call it, and online at our website, battleplattsburgh.org.
And I should mention again, as I've said about other people, that Keith is a very careful historian. And when he goes after something, he doesn't leave many stones unturned. He has to physically turn the stones over. And that's what you do. You go to the source. You go to Washington, D.C. You go to Canada. You go to Sackett's Harbor. You go to many different places and find out what really happened if you can.
Yeah, he looked at a lot of primary source material. He looks at the Journal of a Native American Scout paid by the Americans, and he actually recovered Alexander McComb's order book that had been lost to time.
Isn't that? And he transcribes these old diaries and things.
Yes.
Amazing. Here's something that I don't know if Calvin looked at it before, but you alluded to it.
We mentioned Catherine McComb, and we have a copy of the poem that she wrote as she watched what was going on with her husband here on September 11th.
Isn't that wonderful? And it's a really tender program, or a poem, and it's very interesting.
Yes.
And while we're standing here, I think we ought to help to describe why you and Keith Herculoe and others have decided to change the pronunciation of something we called Macomb and Macomb Street in Plattsburgh in our historic district for so many years. Explain why and how that happened.
You may know the story a lot better from coming from Keith, but it's pronounced Macomb as in tomb, and the family actually was able to point that out
to him. And he's had contact with just about every known descendant.
Yes.
This is another good place to mention that some teenagers defended against the British at Bridge Street.
Yes, we have a section on them actually in our children's portion of the display. In the middle of the museum, we have a hands-on where kids can come and try on clothes and experience some of the toys of the time period, and we do a display on Aiken's Volunteers.
And Aiken's Volunteers defended against the British at what is now Bridge Street in Plattsburgh, and 20 years later, the United States Congress decided to honor them with inscribed rifles. And thanks to Keith's diligence and Antiques Roadshow and others, a number of those rifles have been found.
Yes, I believe he has traced what happened to each one of those, whether it was destroyed or is still in family hands.
He keeps telling me how many they found, but I think it's about 8 if I just had to guess.
I've forgotten now.
But they're invaluable in terms of history and in terms right now of money. Well, the one on the Antiques Roadshow was valued at over $40,000, and that's many years ago. So
they're tremendous pieces. Normally, people for their service were given commemorative swords. This is one of the only times where you see commemorative rifles given out as a reward.
And I think there's one in Plattsburgh, isn't there?
There is. The Clinton County Historical Association has Martin Aiken's rifle from Aiken's Volunteers, and it's actually on loan from the family. And so it's there in the museum. We have, thanks to the Clinton County Historical Association, we have on display one of the plates from one of the rifles. It actually belonged to Ira Wood.
Isn't that great? All right, we're going to move a couple steps backwards.
Excellent.
Sometimes the titles on these panels are as exciting as the contact. Misconceptions.
This was actually my husband Josh Wingler's idea, so we took it and expanded upon it. This is the story of Lucy Brewer, who supposedly now served on board the USS Constitution during the War of 1812. That would have made her the first female Marine. And as it turns out, after doing a little homework and research, and thanks to one of our interns from Plattsburgh State, we found out that Lucy Brewer was actually completely fictitious. She was made up by a gentleman who wrote books about supposedly about her life and who wanted to make a little money. So it's a neat story, and that's one of the misconceptions about the War of 1812.
You know, historical fiction traditionally includes real names and places. And in history, thanks to dime novels and all the other things that we have to rely on that were fiction, a lot of people believed what they read, not knowing the difference, like small children, between fact and fiction. And as I mentioned at the outset of this program, a lot of those, you know, outright falsehoods and manufactured stories were perpetuated until you believe them, until you prove differently. And this is a perfect example.
Very much so. Do a search on the internet for Lucia Baker was one name, or Lucy Brewer, and some sites say it's true, some say it's not. And Eric was actually going to order the diary of Lucy Brewer through Plattsburgh State, and then did a little bit more research and found out it wasn't true.
Just a point, and I'm not degrading any site on the internet, but be careful what you read on Wikipedia, because people contribute to that, and you know, there are changes made all the time. And that's why when I do research, I always look at many sources and try to throw it up in the air and see what lands.
Yes.
So what's the other one? Spies, disguises, and lies. That's kind of cool.
We included the reproduction notepad here with the inkwell because women were utilized rather as spies throughout the War of 1812. That's common in the Civil War as well, and several other wars. And one of the reasons that women were so popular as spies were that they would not be hung as a man would.
Oh, true.
And they couldn't be searched because it was against the etiquette of the day.
Ta-da!
So.
Isn't that amazing? That's a little-known fact. So what else have you got here? You got some true artifacts here, too.
We do. We have grape shot recovered from Lake Champlain, relating to the Battle of Plattsburgh, and we also have bar shot. Those two items could be fired out of a cannon. I don't know about you, but when I think of firing a cannon, I think of a huge cannonball flying out. They had many creative things they could load into a cannon.
And almost all of them were pretty nasty, including hot shot and various devices that were entangled that could really do devastation to people and to the wooden structures that were ships.
Yes.
And thanks to information that came to me shortly after I arrived in Plattsburgh from my dear friend Captain Frank Pabst, and some dives onto the bottom of Lake Champlain and the murky waters, I know, and we now know, thanks to the wonderful Maritime Museum across the lake, that there are an awful lot of things besides fish on the bottom of Lake Champlain. We're discovering more of them every year.
Yes, we have one of the bateaux that was pulled out of the water in 1998, I believe, and we have that here. And one of our possible plans for the bicentennial is to conserve that properly and have it on display here in the museum as we continue to expand.
And thanks to Keith being a friend and being on the radio in those days and on television with Calvin, we've managed to preserve a lot of those history. And as Calvin said, we were there with that. The eyes of that camera sounds like Walter Cronkite. You are there. And it's great, so a lot of that stuff is preserved for future generations. I mention that for several reasons, because there are still many, many artifacts on the lake, and there have been some tremendous battles and discussions about things that were brought up and taken home by the people who dived for them, including a couple cannon that were found off Cliff Haven, also when I was on the radio with Frank Pabst bringing that stuff up. And because in the news, as we're recording this on July 15th, 2010, or 2010 if you prefer, there are plans for a multi-million-dollar power line from Canada to be buried in the silt of Lake Champlain through its full length, coming down the Richelieu from Canada, where they have cheap hydropower, et cetera, all the way down through Lake Champlain, down through the Hudson River to New York City to be distributed on the grid elsewhere. And they said, we hope that it won't cause any environmental damage, because they'll have this little robot that goes and moves the silt back, lays the line down and covers it up. But what happens when they come to an historic exhibit, and you know that our friends at the Maritime Museum will be standing right there on the shore when that machine goes in the water.
Yes.
If it ever happens.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Very interesting sidelight. All right, we can move along. We're with Christina Parker Wingler inside the War of 1812 Museum for the Battle of Plattsburgh Association on the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base, looking at a great recent display. Since May you started this?
May 22nd was the official opening day.
And it's great. Widely, very well, highly acclaimed and accepted, talking about the women and their role at that time. So what's this one all about?
This is the story of Fanny Doyle out in the Fort Niagara region. So again, we're looking at the Northern Theater of the War of 1812. She was sort of the Molly Pitcher of the War of 1812. She served with her husband's gun crew after he was, I forget if he was killed or captured. But anyway, she was a woman artillerist. And again, we have original artwork by John Purdy. And our mini diorama here in the display case was done by my husband, Josh Wingler, using figures that we have for sale in the gift shop. And the little cannon actually came out of the gift shop, too, with a few of his own modifications.
Oh, isn't that great? Where's Ron when we needed him? Couldn't he have done a great job?
Yeah.
And a cannonball. That's a real one.
That's a cannonball, probably from the Battle of Plattsburgh. There's so many down there.
Who knows? I've seen many on the floor. I've seen several wrecks on the bottom of Lake Champlain. There are some as yet undiscovered. Our own Keith Herculow learned to dive at one point in time. I don't know if he's still diving, but
I don't think he has time for that with everything else he does, but
he is a busy guy, that's for sure. So Fanny Doyle, huh?
yes.
That's a name that is, Betsy Doyle and Fanny Doyle, familiar to a lot of people who study history. And not as famous as Joan of Arc, but we alluded to her in the panel too.
Yeah, she was referred to as the Joan of Arc of Fort Niagara. She continued to carry a hot shot to the cannon throughout the battle, and was renowned for her service.
We think that hot shot was used during the Battle of Plattsburgh, don't we?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, I think so. All right, let's move to the next panel. Well, you got to be pretty famous when you get chocolates named after you, right?
Yes.
What about Laura Secord?
This is the story of Laura Secord, famous Canadian figure, and she was able to warn the British of an American oncoming attack. We included the chocolate box because actually I've had quite a number of visitors that come in and they say, "Oh, I've heard of Laura Secord chocolates, but I wasn't sure what it was for."
I never knew that. That's amazing.
Now we can connect the two, and we also included the 1 minute minutes in history done by Canadian television, and they actually advertised Canadian history through little 1 minute ads on TV, and I think it's a wonderful, neat way to learn about their history, and we offer it in English and French for our Canadian visitors.
Isn't that wonderful? And we have another panel that says reward for her bravery.
She received 100 pounds, but she didn't receive the 100 pounds from the British government until she was quite old. So this was an act she did. She walked miles to warn the British while her husband was ill in the house because she was courting soldiers and heard them talking. And then she received this reward when one of the members of the royal family came to visit Canada. He heard of her story, went and met Laura Secord, and gave her that reward. And included in here we have the what her response was to that member of the royal family.
That's over Calvin's left shoulder, the Laura Secord speech.
Yes.
And I'm sure she penned it all by herself, and it's rather eloquent.
It is, and it's rather lengthy, but for visitors that want to take the time and learn about her own words, I thought, who best to tell the story than Laura Secord herself, so we've included it here for those that are interested.
I love it. Here I found all the Indians encamped. By moonlight, the scene was terrifying, and to those accustomed to such scenes might be considered grand. Don't you love it? Upon advancing to the Indians, they all rose and with some yells said, "Woman," which made me tremble. I love it. I cannot express the awful feeling it gave me. Wow. When you hear the actual words,
It really brings it to life, I think.
it really absolutely does. So it's nice to have that. I don't know where that speech was found. Was that found in Canadian archives?
That was actually found on the Gala Films Canadian site. They're
Oh, no kidding.
excellent site for War of 1812 resources. They have Anne Provost's journals published and several other primary source material, so it's wonderful.
I know it takes a long time to set up an exhibit like this. It takes thought time before you get to the actual exhibit.
It
So
does.
how long did you work on it?
A year and a half from start to finish,
No
from concept.
kidding.
Because you have to take the concept and then figure out if it's actually feasible and if you have the artifacts to back it up.
There are exhibits, and there are exhibits. Some are tasteful, some are a little bit gauche and gaudy, and I've been to many. Some museums just can't afford to have a real classy exhibit. But right from the beginning, all the exhibits you've had have been first rate.
That's what we try and do, is present first-rate material that people can really learn from, and that's the name of the game, to make sure it looks professional.
You have to work very hard to confirm that the facts are right, first of all, because you have a lot of school children who are learning this for the first time, and their families who may never have been inside any museum in their lifetimes.
Definitely, we've done our research. We have had people come in, not in this particular exhibit, but people come in and say, we don't believe that's quite right. So we'll take their information down, do the research. If it's not right, we'll correct it.
Yeah.
So.
Because history is changing every moment we live, and the information about past history is sometimes inaccurate because of all the reasons we've mentioned. Behind Christina is that very famous painting of the peace treaty ending the War of 1812.
Yes.
Signed on December 24th on Christmas Eve, right?
1814.
1814 in Ghent, Belgium, the signing of the treaty. And that painting was done, it says, in 1914.
Yes.
I didn't realize that.
Commemorative
was
piece,
done.
yes.
Well, that was significant because that meant the war was over. For a while, people didn't know that.
Right, and what a better way to end the exhibit than have the war is over, peace is declared. And one of the research materials that we used was a book by noted Canadian historian Diane Graves called
yes.
Women in the Midst of Alarm. It's all about the War of 1812, women's roles, and that was a great piece for us to look at. And after the war is over, she actually has a chapter dedicated to what happened to the women after the war. How did their lives end up? So.
Isn't that great? Have you had many school groups in your museum?
We haven't right now. We have several groups planned. It's actually been a lot of senior citizen groups that are interested, and a lot of women's groups that are interested because of this exhibit. We just had the Red Hatters last week, and tomorrow we have a class from the YMCA.
I think that's a commentary, at times sad, on the sometimes lesser value some people pay to history for little children. I mean, for many years, the chapters on local history were a little bit scant in the schools, and now it's required at certain grade levels. And so if I had to do more preaching here today, I would say it behooves some of these teachers to make an appointment with you to get their school kids up here.
Definitely. We charge $3 a head for the school groups, for the children, and then we chaperones are free, but we can tailor make the programs. And unfortunately, with school budget cuts and everything, sometimes the field trips are cut out. But we do have the ability to bring a reenactor into the school itself and do a program that way.
What a great idea!
And we have lesson plans on our website in New York State standards and national standards, and we're working on one for centered around the women's exhibit that'll go up shortly on our website, so keep watching for the
You
changes.
can't beat it when they promise to come to your place, bring the mountain to Muhammad, right?
We'll do what we can. It's all about spreading the word.
Yeah. The only other, you've got a couple of things in the middle that we didn't look at. We talked about Aiken's volunteers.
We did.
Perhaps a little prematurely because it's over Calvin's shoulder, but we talked about those rifles and the fact that a number of them have been found thanks to the diligence of Keith Herculow and others. We want to invite a lot of people to see this exhibit. It'll be here for how much longer?
May, so 16 months. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and we're here in
So-
the middle of July, so there's still time by the time you
Yes.
see this, folks. And fortunately, Calvin has been very astute about getting these programs on the internet early, and that's something else we can mention before we move into the gallery. The fact that these programs are on the internet, available for a worldwide global audience at hometowncablenetwork.com and at plattsburgh.com. Over 4,000 different shows of one kind or another are available. And that itself is a pretty neat archive and piece of history, wouldn't you say?
Excellent. Excellent.
Now, there is a wonderful gallery. We've only got a few minutes left, and if you don't mind, we'll go in there and just take a brief look around.
Breeze through, that's fine.
All right. We've moved, but not more than 15 or 20 feet away, into what we call the gallery.
The Alan S. Everest Interpretive Center,
I
actually.
love it. This, you know, when you first moved into this building, it was kind of an unknown as to what the future would hold.
Right.
But it unfolded, sometimes by itself and sometimes with a lot of hard work.
We held the grand opening of this section at the same point that we did the women's exhibit. So we were actually doing 2 exhibits at once for about a week.
Explain to people what this gallery and interpretive center is all about, because you did not move the interpretive center over here until recently.
Right, we just moved this over here in May, and what the Interpretive Center is all about is telling the story of the Battle of Plattsburgh within the context of War of 1812. It's a permanent exhibit that we keep. We change the artifacts, change the displays, but the Interpretive Center will always be here, anchored by a diorama that tells the story of the Battle of Plattsburgh.
And we're not going to show that diorama today. But for those of you who may have seen it before, let me tell you, you may not even recognize it.
We made some changes. It was a tabletop display that was originally made for City Hall, moved over here to the base, continued to be a tabletop, and now is a aerial view of Plattsburgh. It looks a little different. You can stand and see the whole battle, stand back.
Children and adults alike will love it. This is a wonderful space. And what's the future going to hold for this building?
One can never knows. We hope to expand backwards. We have a huge space behind us, and I think we'll continue to expand, every 20 feet or so, and add new exhibits as we are able to get the money. We're a donation-based organization, so we rely on volunteer efforts and donations to make the changes happen.
It's very difficult for organizations like this to survive. This one has survived because of a lot of hard work, a very bright group of people who are almost savagely dedicated to the cause, and that's what it takes sometimes.
We live and breathe the War of 1812, I think, sometimes.
Because there is a thing called red tape, which is difficult. So it's not an easy job to get from here to there, from dreams to reality.
It takes persistence, and that we have.
Keith is a dreamer, but he's also a hard worker. And he's told me some secret things about what he'd love to see happening out here. And nobody would love to see those things come to fruition more than I would, and I know you feel the same way.
Yes, but things will happen the way they're supposed to, and we just have to keep going forward and seeing what happens.
Now, you said there's a lot of activity planned in September, as we're recording this in July.
Yes. Noted here at the museum, we will have noted historian Donald Graves speaking, Canadian War of 1812 historian, top notch, and John Grudzinski will be with him. We'll have the Aikens movie playing in our theater, the Aikens film that was produced by PBS, and then out in the town and city of Plattsburgh, there'll be reenactments, all kinds of commemorations. The schedule has been posted on our website and our Facebook page.
Whenever you see this or whenever you hear about it, my suggestion would be to plan your vacation right now. If you could possibly rent a hotel room or call a neighbor saying, oh, we're coming up for a couple of weeks in September.
It's a great family event.
It is. It's a great family place. Again, we want to just talk about the fact that this is in part of what we call a museum complex or a campus involving 3 museums. This one, Clinton County Historical Museum and the Transportation Museum. It's what a place to spend a few days with your family, whether you're from this area or not.
It's wonderful, and we all promote each other, work together, and we've even had some school groups that came and toured, one or two, three of the museums as doing a day trip. So we all try and work together. It's wonderful.
Well, first of all, I want to give you my personal congratulations. Since I've known you since early childhood, I love the person you are.
Thank you.
Say hi to your whole family for me.
Yeah, thanks, Parkers.
And Parkers, yes, that great maple syrup tradition in the North Country. I would like to thank all the people who watch this program, who comment positively, negatively, or somewhere in between. People seem to like what we do. Thanks to Calvin for carrying that camera since the early 80s, for capturing all these wonderful images for posterity. Watch this program on HometownCableNetwork.com or Plattsburgh.com. It should be up and running probably within a day or so, depending on how many ball games Calvin has to do that night. We love your suggestions. We love your comments. We also love your contributions. So if you want to make out a check for $10,000 this afternoon or 59 cents, send it to Hometown Cable on the Ridge Road in Champlain. And who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.